The night was dark, and the airport was buzzing with travelers rushing through the terminals, unaware of the twist of fate about to unfold. Jason had been standing in front of the gate for what felt like hours, his hand clutching his boarding pass, but his mind was elsewhere. His business trip to London, something he had been dreading for weeks, was now the last thing on his mind. He had just received the worst news of his life, a family emergency that demanded he be home, not halfway, across the world. His heart was racing and his hands were shaking as he stared at the flight board, contemplating whether he should stay or go. It was then, in the midst of his indecision, that he heard a faint voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you okay?" Jason turned, startled, and found himself face to face with a young woman, her uniform covered in oil stains. She had the look of someone who worked hard, someone who didn't have much, but carried herself with the strength of someone who had fought through storms and still smiled. Her name was Emily, and she was a mechanic at the airport, fixing planes that most of the passengers never noticed. But in that moment, her presence felt like a lifeline. Jason couldn't help but wonder why she was standing there, addressing him, a man who had every reason to ignore the world. But her voice, gentle yet full of concern, pulled him in. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked again, her eyes filled with a quiet compassion that Jason couldn't ignore. He almost shook his head, dismissing her, but something in her gaze stopped him. He sighed deeply, a sound of frustration and fear. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. "I'm about to board this flight, but I don't think I can. My family needs me, but I can't cancel it. I'm stuck." Without missing a beat, Emily stepped closer, her face softening with empathy. "Life doesn't always go as planned," she said. "But sometimes the people who least expect it are the ones who can make all the difference." Jason blinked, surprised by her words, but before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the runway. Without a second thought, Emily's eyes widened, and she sprinted toward the noise, leaving Jason standing there, bewildered. His instinct told him to follow, but he hesitated, unsure if he should. He had his own crisis to deal with, yet something about the urgency in her actions, the calm with which she moved through chaos, felt like it could offer him the clarity he so desperately needed. Jason stood frozen, the noise of the airport fading as he watched Emily sprint toward the runway. His eyes followed her, a mixture of confusion and curiosity gripping him. He didn't know why, but something in the way she carried herself, the quiet determination mixed with an innocence that seemed so out of place in the chaotic world around them, pulled at his heartstrings. Emily wasn't like the others. She didn't wear a tailored suit. She didn't speak with polished confidence or pretend like the world owed her something. She wasn't trying to sell him something, to make him believe in her. She simply existed, present, grounded, and undeniably real. As she disappeared into the distance, Jason felt an unexpected pang of guilt in his chest. Here he was, consumed with his own problems, while a girl who probably had nothing more than a few dollars in her pocket was rushing toward a crisis without a second thought for herself. It wasn't long before the loud hum of the emergency vehicles reached his ears, followed by flashing lights that reflected off the glass windows of the terminal. The airport staff began to move with urgency, but Emily, through all the chaos, seemed to remain a calm force. Jason, still unsure of what to do with his own emotions, found himself walking toward the source of the commotion, toward Emily. He approached the hangar. He saw her, now on the tarmac, her hands expertly working to manage a situation with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But it wasn't her skills that struck him. It was the way she moved, the way she managed everything with such an unshakable calmness, despite the danger that lingered in the air. Emily's face was focused, but there was an unmistakable innocence in her expression, like she hadn't yet been jaded by the world's harshness. She wasn't in it for the accolades or the recognition. She was just doing what needed to be done. Jason stood there a few feet away, watching her in awe. he realized how much he had taken for granted in his life. Here was a young woman, someone with so little, who was willing to risk everything just to help. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask for permission. She simply acted. There was no pretense, no expectation of gratitude. She was doing what she did because she believed it was right. And that made Jason feel small in comparison. For a moment, he wanted to walk away, to go back to his own problems, to return to his safe little bubble of wealth and privilege. But the more he watched Emily, the more something inside of him shifted. He didn't want to be that person anymore, the one who only thought of himself, who was too consumed by his own comfort to see the people around him. Emily didn't have to sacrifice for others. She didn't have to put herself in harm's way. Yet she did it without a single thought for herself. And that, more than anything, shook him to his core. As she worked to secure the situation, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the controls, Jason couldn't help but feel a rush of admiration and sympathy. She was vulnerable in ways he had never been, yet she was doing more than most people could ever dream of. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't looking for praise. All she wanted was to make sure everyone was okay. The innocence in her. Selflessness was something he'd lost along the way, somewhere between his boardroom meetings and his high-rise apartment. Jason approached her slowly, unsure of what to say, but knowing he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He cleared his throat, the words catching in his throat. You're amazing, he said, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. Emily didn't look up at him, her focus never wavering from the task at hand. I'm just doing my job, sir, she replied, her voice steady but kind, as though she didn't believe she was doing anything out of the ordinary. But to Jason, everything about this moment felt extraordinary. Here was someone so pure, so innocent in her actions, that she had no idea just how much she was teaching him in that instant. She had no agenda, no expectation, just a quiet, unwavering resolve to do what was right. He stepped closer, now standing beside her. No, it's more than that, he said, his voice tinged with newfound respect. I think you've just saved my life. She paused for a second, finally glancing up at him, her eyes meeting his with a soft, understanding smile. For a moment, Jason thought he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She wasn't afraid. She was just her. And that was enough. Maybe, she said, shrugging lightly, but I'm just doing my part. Sometimes, people don't realize that they need saving until someone shows them the way. Jason stood there, for a moment, watching Emily with a sense of awe. He had been surrounded by luxury, wealth, and high status for so long, yet none of that had ever made him feel this way. None of the business deals, the boardroom victories, or the expensive dinners ever gave him the kind of clarity that Emily's selflessness had. Her innocent courage, her willingness to put others before herself, and the pure simplicity of her actions shook him in a way nothing ever had before. He couldn't stop thinking about it. In that moment, it wasn't just the airplane emergency or her skillful handling of the situation that mattered. It was the moral clarity that she embodied. Emily had nothing to prove. She didn't expect recognition. She wasn't doing this for the praise or the rewards. In fact, she seemed unaware of the profound effect her actions had on those around her. And that was precisely what struck Jason so deeply. Here was a person who lived without the need to be noticed, someone whose kindness and integrity came naturally. He realized that this kind of purity, this type of morality, was something he had lost over the years, traded for status, for business success, for the shallow pursuit of power and wealth. He had spent so much time building walls around his own life to protect himself from the vulnerability of others, never once stopping to consider that maybe, just maybe, the true strength lay in opening up to people. He looked down at the ground, his mind racing. How many times had he brushed past people like Emily, assuming they were beneath him, that they had nothing to offer? How many moments had he dismissed the possibility of a simple, heartfelt connection because he was too focused on his own agenda, too consumed with his own success to see the quiet struggles of others? The guilt weighed heavy on him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of regret. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to thank me, just doing my job." But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that what she had just done was far more than just a job. She had given him something he never thought he needed: perspective. Her innocence, her humility, and her compassion had opened his eyes to the fact that he had been living in a bubble. The world around him wasn't just about numbers, about climbing the corporate ladder or gaining power. The true worth of a person, he now realized, came from their ability to give, to help, to sacrifice for others without asking for anything in return. As the emergency situation was quickly resolved, Jason stood silently beside her, watching her move with quiet efficiency. He felt a sense of discomfort, a gnawing sense of shame, that something so simple as a mechanic's job could bring about the kind of moral clarity that his years of education and wealth had failed to. How had he gotten so lost? How had he let his ambitions cloud the true meaning of life? Jason's gaze met Emily's again. This time, he saw something different in her eyes. She wasn't just a girl fixing planes. She was the embodiment of something he had forgotten, a reminder of the innocence of purpose, the kind of integrity that can never be bought or sold. She had nothing but her honesty, her work ethic, and her willingness to put others first. And that was more valuable than all the money in his bank accounts or the status in his social circles. "Why do you do it?" Jason finally asked, his voice quiet, tinged with a curiosity that had long been dormant in him. "Why put yourself through all this? You could be doing anything, living a life far easier than this." Emily looked up at him then, her expression soft, but there was a quiet strength in her gaze. "I don't think life's about taking the easy road," she said. "It's about doing what's right. It's about showing up for people, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. It's the little things that matter, helping someone without expecting anything in return. That's where the real change happens." Jason felt his heart tighten, as if something inside him had been loosened. A part of him he didn't even know was locked up. He hadn't expected to learn a lesson here, not in this airport, not from someone like her. But Emily had given him something that no expensive therapist, no consultant, no business coach could ever provide: a wake-up call, a moral awakening. In that moment, Jason understood. It wasn't about the money, the deals, the accolades. It was about people. It was about how we treat others, how we make them feel, and how we choose to show up in the world. It was about the decisions we make when no one's watching, the quiet sacrifices we make for those who need us the most. It was about empathy. Jason's chest tightened as the weight of his realization hit him. He had been living for himself for so long, but Emily had shown him that there was a better way. A more fulfilling, more meaningful way. He didn't need to keep climbing higher to feel successful. He didn't need to measure his worth by how much he had. He needed to measure it by the difference he could make in someone else's life, just as Emily had done for him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled, a simple but genuine smile that lit up her face. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "Just remember this moment. Remember the lesson." Jason nodded, feeling a tear threaten to fall. He didn't know how to thank her properly, how to repay the debt he felt for this newfound wisdom. But in that moment, he understood that the only way to truly honor her kindness was to change, to become the person he was meant to be, a man who lived with integrity, humility, and compassion. As the plane emergency was over, and the tension in the air finally began to subside, Jason found himself standing on the tarmac, feeling oddly out of place. The engine that had once been the source of chaos and fear now hummed quietly in the background, as if it too had been relieved of its burden. Yet, in that moment, it was Jason who felt burdened. Burdened by the weight of what he had just witnessed, by the overwhelming realization that everything he had thought mattered in life had suddenly been called into question. He looked over at Emily, who was now wiping grease from her hands, her expression calm, but there was a quiet strength about her that Jason couldn't ignore. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need praise. She didn't need to be the hero in a story. And yet, in Jason's eyes, that's exactly what she was. She had saved not only the passengers of that flight, but also him. She had saved him from his own arrogance, from the shell of a life he had built around him, believing it was the only way to live. But now he realized everything felt empty. The million-dollar contracts, the flashy cars, the luxury homes, they all felt like hollow, meaningless pursuits. His heart ached with a sense of loss, a loss he couldn't put into words. He had spent so many years chasing the wrong things, and now that he had seen what true value looked like, it was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. The weight of regret pressed on his chest, threatening to suffocate him. "Emily," Jason finally said, his voice unsteady. "What you did today, what you just did, it was... I don't know how to say it, but it was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed." Emily turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly, but there was no arrogance in her eyes, only a quiet, humble warmth that made Jason's heart ache even more. She didn't want this kind of recognition. She didn't need it. She was content in her own skin, in the work she did, in knowing that she had made a difference in someone's life, even if that someone was just a stranger. But Jason wasn't a stranger. He had seen her, really seen her for the first time. And in doing so, he saw the person he had become, and the person he could be, if only he could find the courage to change. "I don't deserve any praise," Emily said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm just doing my job." "But it's not just your job, Emily," Jason replied, his voice shaking now. He could feel his emotions rising, a lump forming in his throat. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the tears were already threatening to spill. "What you did wasn't just about fixing a plane. It was about saving lives. You didn't hesitate. You didn't think about the risk to your own safety. You just acted. You were there when everyone else was frozen in fear. You were the only one who didn't run from the danger." The words tumbled out of him in a rush, the dam of emotions that had been building for so long finally breaking free. He felt vulnerable, like he was standing naked in front of her, his heart laid bare. This wasn't about the flight anymore. This wasn't about business or success. This was about Jason realizing just how far he had strayed from the person he once wanted to be, the person who cared about others, the person who didn't let pride and ego dictate every decision. And in that moment, Jason couldn't hold it back anymore. The tears that had been building in his chest finally spilled down his face, hot and relentless. He wiped them away with the back of his hand, ashamed at his emotional outburst, but he couldn't help it. He had been holding on to so much for so long, his pride, his self-centeredness, his fear of showing weakness, and now here he was, in front of this mechanic girl who had somehow shattered all the walls he had built around himself. Emily stepped closer to him, her eyes wide with concern. But she didn't look at him with pity. No, her expression was one of quiet understanding. She reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice filled with the kind of compassion that only comes from someone who has known true hardship, true struggle. "You don't have to hide how you feel. You're human. And it's okay to feel everything." Jason felt a wave of emotion wash over him at her words. Here he was, a successful CEO, someone who prided himself on being in control at all times. And yet this mechanic girl, someone who had so little by society's standards, was offering him the kind of empathy and kindness he had never known he needed. He hadn't even realized how much he had been starving for connection, for someone to truly understand him without judgment. "I've been so lost, Emily," Jason said, his voice trembling. "I thought I had everything figured out. Money, success, power. But now I realize I don't have any of the things that matter. I've hurt people, I've let people down, and I don't know how to fix it." Emily squeezed his arm gently, her voice steady as she spoke. "It's not too late to change, Jason. It's never too late. You can always choose to do better. You can always choose to be better." Jason looked at her, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She was right. He didn't have to be the man he had been. He didn't have to continue down this empty path. He could change. He could choose to become someone who put others first, someone who lived with integrity, kindness, and humility. And it all started with this moment, this raw, unguarded moment where he had allowed himself to feel, really feel, for the first time in years. He swallowed hard, his emotions still raw, but there was a new sense of determination in his eyes. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." As the days passed after the flight emergency, Jason couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her calmness under pressure, her quick thinking, and her quiet strength had left a lasting impression on him. But there was something else that lingered in his mind. A sense that Emily wasn't just a hero in that moment. She had been living her life in a way that made her the kind of person who would naturally act the way she did during the crisis. She wasn't just saving lives on a plane. She was quietly sacrificing for others in ways no one could see, ways that went unnoticed, unthanked, and unappreciated. One evening, as Jason sat in his office, he found himself lost in thought, thinking about how Emily had spoken so little about herself. She hadn't shared much about her background, her struggles, or the hardships she had endured. She had simply done her job, and done it so well, so effortlessly, that it made Jason realize how little he had truly understood about people like her. Curious, Jason decided to visit the small hangar where Emily worked. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he knew he wanted to know more. He had to understand what drove her, what made her tick, what allowed her to be so selfless and brave. He wasn't prepared for what he would discover. As he entered the hangar, he was surprised by how quiet it was. The faint hum of machinery was the only sound, and the smell of oil and metal filled the air. But then he saw Emily, alone at a workbench, her hands delicately repairing a piece of equipment. Her face was calm, focused, but there was an exhaustion in her eyes, one that Jason hadn't noticed before. The edges of her face were worn with the weight of long hours and hard work. She was tired. Jason approached her cautiously, not wanting to disturb her, but he couldn't help himself. "Emily," he said softly. She looked up from her work, offering him a smile that was as warm as it was tired. "Hey, Jason, what brings you here?" Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to ask what he was thinking. "I've been wondering about you, about how you do all of this, and still seem so calm. How do you manage to be so strong, day in and day out?" Emily's smile faded slightly, her eyes flickering with a sadness that Jason had never noticed before. She set down the tool she was holding and wiped her hands on a rag, taking a deep breath before speaking. "It's not always easy," she said softly, her voice quiet but steady. "There are days when I don't know how I'm going to get through. There are times when I'm just so tired, physically, emotionally, but I don't have the luxury of stopping. People rely on me. I've always been the one people depend on, the one who holds things together." Jason listened intently, his heart tightening as he realized just how much weight Emily was carrying, and how little recognition she had for it. She wasn't a hero who sought accolades. She wasn't someone who expected applause. She was simply someone who carried the burden of others without hesitation, without complaint, even when it drained her. "I don't know if I ever told you this," Emily continued, her voice becoming softer as she spoke. "But my family, well, my mom, she's been sick for a long time. I've been taking care of her for years now, managing her medical bills, making sure she gets the treatments she needs. I work 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep things afloat. It's hard, really hard. But what else can I do? She's my mom. I can't just walk away. Jason stood in stunned silence. He had no idea. He hadn't even considered that there might be more to Emily's life than what met the eye. He had never realized how much she had sacrificed just to keep her family going, how much she had given of herself without ever asking for anything in return. But you still show up day after day to work on planes. You risk your life to save others, Jason said, his voice filled with awe and respect. How do you do it? How do you keep going? Emily looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a deep, unspoken truth. Because I have to. I can't afford to stop. I can't afford to think about myself. If I don't do this, if I don't keep going, then who will? My family needs me. The people I work with need me, and I'm not going to let them down. Jason felt his heart swell with admiration for her. She wasn't just strong, she was a survivor, a warrior in her own quiet way. She fought battles no one knew about, and yet she didn't complain, didn't ask for help. She simply kept going, silently carrying the weight of her world on her shoulders. But don't you ever get tired? Jason asked, his voice a little more urgent now. Don't you ever want to rest? To let someone else carry the load for a while? Emily smiled again, a faint, bittersweet smile. I'd love to rest, Jason, but rest doesn't come when you're the only one who can keep things together. I've learned that the hard way. If I don't do it, no one else will. And that's just the way it is. Jason stood there in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He realized that Emily wasn't just a mechanic, wasn't just the girl who had saved his life on that plane. She was a symbol of sacrifice, of the kind of quiet, uncelebrated strength that the world often overlooked. As he left the hangar, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude for Emily and a newfound understanding of the sacrifices people like her made every day, often without anyone ever noticing. He couldn't change the past, but he knew one thing for sure. He would never again take the quiet sacrifices of people like Emily for granted. Jason couldn't get the image of Emily out of his mind. The way she had handled everything with such grace despite the storm of emotions that he knew had to be swirling inside her. There was a fire in her eyes. A fire that didn't scream for attention, but burned quietly and intensely, like an ember waiting to ignite. And it wasn't just about her courage in the moment. It was about her constant, never-ending sacrifices. He lay in bed that night, the words she had said to him echoed in his mind. If I don't do it, no one else will. The weight of those words made his chest tighten. The protective side of him surged up, and he realized just how much he wanted to be there for her, to shield her from the relentless pressures she had been carrying alone for so long. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He couldn't just stand by and watch as she put herself on the line over and over again. His mind raced with thoughts of ways he could help, but deep down, he knew this was bigger than just offering her help. It was about being her protector. He wanted to be the one who stood by her, the one who would take on the world's weight with her, even if she never asked for it. He needed to show her that she wasn't alone in this fight. The next day, Jason visited the hangar again, this time with a clear sense of purpose. He couldn't just walk in and pretend that everything was normal. No, he had to confront the truth. Emily wasn't just a woman who saved his life once. She was someone who had been silently bearing burdens for years, and it was time for him to do something about it. As he entered the hangar, he spotted Emily, working on the wing of a small aircraft. Her face was focused, her hands moving deftly over the machinery. But there was a heaviness about her, a subtle tension in her shoulders that Jason couldn't ignore. She wasn't just fixing planes, she was fixing the cracks in her own life, piecing together a shattered puzzle that no one had ever seen. Walked up to her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the machines around them was the only sound in the otherwise quiet hangar. Emily glanced up from her work, and for the first time Jason saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She was more than just tired. She was worn out, The kind of weariness that came from carrying too many burdens alone for too long. Emily. Jason's voice was low, yet firm. I need you to listen to me. You've been through too much, and I can't just stand by anymore. You don't have to do this alone. She looked at him, the corners of her mouth twitching in a half smile. I'm fine, Jason, I've got this. Her voice was confident, but the thinness in her words betrayed the truth. She wasn't fine. Jason shook his head, stepping closer to her. No, you're not fine. You've been carrying so much, and you're doing it alone. I can't just keep watching you destroy yourself. I'm here for you, Emily. Let me be here for you. A moment of silence hung between them. Emily's eyes softened, and Jason saw the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long. But before she could respond, a loud noise broke their brief moment of connection, the sound of a plane revving its engines outside. Emily flinched slightly, her body going rigid as she quickly straightened up. Jason's heart tightened at the sight. It wasn't just the sound of the engines that had rattled her. It was the reminder of the danger she faced every single day, working in a job that could cost her life at any moment. She was constantly putting herself at risk, and the thought of her doing it alone, without anyone to lean on, tore at him. I can't just let you keep doing this, Emily, Jason continued, his voice urgent, filled with raw emotion. You're too important, and I'm not going to stand by while you risk your life without someone looking out for you. You deserve more than this. Emily's eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed to hesitate. Jason could see that her walls were beginning to crack, but she was still fighting it. She was used to being the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone else. But Jason was determined to change that. He was going to be the one who supported her, the one who would protect her when she couldn't protect herself. I know you don't want to ask for help, and I know you're used to doing things on your own, Jason said, his voice steady but full of conviction. But Emily, you don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I will protect you. I won't let you fall. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jason's protective instincts had fully emerged, and they weren't going anywhere. He wasn't just talking about keeping her safe from physical harm. He was talking about protecting her from the emotional burden she carried every day, the weight she didn't even realize she had been carrying. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she placed the wrench down on the workbench. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she allowed herself to relax, even just for a moment. She looked at Jason, and in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. A promise that he would stand by her no matter what. I don't know how to let someone else in, Jason, Emily whispered, her voice soft with vulnerability. I don't know how to stop being the one who always has to do it all. But maybe I can learn to trust you. Jason took a step forward, closing the distance between them. You don't have to do anything alone anymore, Emily. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. As Emily looked at him, something shifted. The walls she had built around herself, walls made of fear, pride, and years of solitude, began to crumble. She wasn't just allowing him to protect her, she was letting herself be protected. And in that moment, Jason knew that he was going to do whatever it took to keep her safe, to help her heal, and to give her the peace she had so long denied, herself. Jason sat in the quiet of his apartment, the weight of the previous days pressing down on him. His thoughts were consumed by the moment Emily had revealed her deepest fear to him. I have no one else. The words had cut deeper than anything else. Emily, the woman who had saved his life, had been carrying the world on her shoulders all alone for so long. And yet, here he was, someone who had a chance to be there for her, and he hadn't fully realized how much she needed him until now. He rubbed his temples, his mind swirling with regret. Regret for all the times he had been too self-absorbed, too focused on his own life, to notice what Emily had been going through. He had seen the physical toll on her body, how she worked tirelessly, how she kept a brave face. But he hadn't truly understood the emotional burden she carried. The walls she built around herself, the isolation she put up, all because she had never trusted anyone enough to let them in. Jason had failed her, and worse, he had failed to realize it until it was almost too late. That deep sense of regret gnawed at him. He had been so focused on the immediate thrill of surviving the crash, of processing his own life-or-death experience, that he had completely missed the fact that Emily had been facing her own battle for years. She had kept her pain hidden, just as he had kept his, but it was clear now that their connection wasn't just about survival. It was about something much deeper. Something that tied them together in ways Jason hadn't fully appreciated. The thought of what Emily had gone through, what she was still going through, made him feel guilty. All the times he had been too busy, or too self-focused to be there for her, the regret he felt now was overwhelming. But then, in the midst of his self-recrimination, something shifted. A quiet resolve began to form in his chest. He could not undo the past, but he could change the future. He could do better. He could be the man Emily needed him to be. The man who wouldn't turn his back on her, who wouldn't leave her alone in her darkest moments. This was his chance at redemption, not just in her eyes, but in his own. The next day, Jason found himself standing outside the hangar again, determined to make things right. He knew Emily would likely try to push him away. She always did, built out of the stubborn pride that had protected her for so long. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. He had wronged her, but he was going to show her he could be a man of integrity, of responsibility, and above all, of unwavering support. As he walked through the hangar doors, his eyes locked onto Emily, who was once again working on a plane. She was so immersed in her work, but he could see the exhaustion written across her face. It was the same exhaustion that had been there every time he had seen her, but now, it carried more weight. This wasn't just physical fatigue. It was emotional weariness, the kind that came from carrying years of pain and regret alone. "Emily," Jason called softly, approaching her. She looked up, her face tight with surprise. "What are you doing?" "Here, Jason." Her voice was clipped, defensive. Jason paused, taking a deep breath, the words weighing heavily on him. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. And I realize now that I've been so caught up in my own life that I didn't see what you were going through. I didn't see how much you were carrying. And that was wrong. Of me." Emily's eyes narrowed, and she took a step back. "Jason, you don't owe me an apology. I've been doing fine on my own." "I know you have," Jason replied, his voice steady but raw. "But you don't have to do this alone. I've made mistakes, Emily, and I can't change the past. But I can change how I move forward from here. I want to be here for you. Not as someone who just owes you a life debt, but as someone who respects you, who wants to help you carry what you're carrying." Her eyes softened, but only for a second. She quickly masked it with a deflection, her walls still up. "You don't need to do that, I'm fine." Jason stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "No, Emily, you're not. You've been surviving. You've been fighting. But you don't have to fight alone anymore. I want to be the one who stands beside you. I want to help you, not because I feel guilty, but because I care about you. I've been selfish. But I won't be anymore." The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment Emily stood frozen, caught between the instinct to protect herself and the vulnerability that had been slowly seeping through. Jason saw it, the moment when she was teetering on the edge of something. She could either push him away again, or she could take the risk. "You're not the only one who's been carrying regret," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've spent so long trying to prove that I don't need anyone. I've been so afraid that if I let someone in, I'd just end up hurt again." Jason's heart clenched. He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "I won't hurt you. I promise. I'll do everything in my power to make up for the mistakes I've made. I'll be there for you, every step of the way." Emily looked at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. "I'm scared, Jason. I don't know how to trust anymore." Jason squeezed her hand, his voice firm but gentle. "I understand, but trust doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, and I'm willing to walk it with you." In that moment, both of them understood something. Redemption wasn't just about fixing past wrongs. It was about giving each other the grace to heal, to grow, and to forgive. For Emily, it was about learning that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. And for Jason, it was about proving that he could be the kind of man who wouldn't just stand by but would actively be there, no matter how difficult it got. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but they had taken the first step together. The rain came down hard that night. Thunder cracked like a warning from the sky. Emily stood alone in the hangar, soaked through, still working on the same plane. It was the aircraft Jason was scheduled to take the next morning. But something in her gut whispered that something was off. A faint vibration under the engine. A sound others ignored. Emily didn't. She dropped her wrench and climbed under the fuselage again, hands trembling. Everyone else had clocked out. No one questioned the final checks. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling, like fate was testing her one last time. She pulled out a cracked sensor, barely hanging on. Had this gone undetected, the engine could have failed mid-flight. Meanwhile, Jason sat in his hotel room, ticket in hand, heart heavy. He'd almost canceled his flight again, the same flight he'd rescheduled twice. This time, not out of fear, but guilt, confusion, and something unspoken. A pull toward that hangar. Toward her. Toward a girl who once saved him. Something told him, she needs to be seen. She needs someone to believe. Emily ran her fingers over the replacement. Parts drenched, exhausted, shaking. She knew she wasn't required to stay. No one would blame her if she walked away. But it wasn't about protocols. It was about people. It was about one man boarding this plane tomorrow who trusted her, and she refused to let anyone down, not even the world that forgot her. She finished the repair, her breath fogging in the cold, trembling with adrenaline. No applause, no audience. Just a mechanic girl and her silent, life-saving decision. She scribbled a final note in the inspection log. Flight safe, issue resolved. And then, she stood there, looking at the plane with fierce pride. Not for recognition, but because she knew, deep down, she mattered. Jason arrived at the airport the next day, noticing the unusual alert. A maintenance delay, brief but important, had postponed the flight by 30 minutes. Something inside him stirred, not frustration, but curiosity. He pulled aside a staff member, casually asking what had happened. The worker replied, "Some mechanic girl caught a critical failure just in time." He froze. Mechanic girl? Emily. His heart skipped like a faulty propeller. She had stayed. She had watched out for him, again. Not because she had to, but because it's who she was. Jason felt the air drain from his lungs as realization hit him hard. This wasn't coincidence. It was a wake-up call dressed in overalls. After the flight, Jason rushed back to the hangar, storming in breathless. Emily was there, hunched over another plane, hands blackened with grease. He walked straight to her. No words, just awe painted across his face. "I know what you did," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "You saved me, again, without anyone asking. Why do you keep doing this?" She stood slowly, her tired eyes meeting his. "Because no one ever did it for me." That single line hit him like a bolt of lightning, simple, pure, heart-wrenching. In her, he saw the quiet heroes the world walks past every day, and in himself, He saw the man he still had time to become. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was their moment of purpose. Jason walked over to the wall, pulled out his phone, and began filming. "Everyone needs to see this," he whispered, capturing the rain-streaked hanger. Not for viral fame, not for sympathy, but to give her the credit she never claimed. He turned the camera to her and said, "This woman saves lives quietly." And it's time the world finally listened. That video went viral overnight. Millions watched, many cried, but Emily didn't care about the numbers. She never did. What mattered was that for once, she wasn't invisible. Her quiet work had saved lives, inspired thousands, changed one man forever, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a name on a checklist. She was hope. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the runway gold as the hangar doors creaked open. Emily stood there, not with oil on her hands, but with peace in her heart. Her overalls were the same, but everything inside her had changed. She was no longer just a girl patching engines in silence. She was the woman who'd saved lives, and finally been seen. Jason walked beside her, no longer just a businessman or grateful passenger. He had become something deeper, a believer in forgotten people. After that night, he didn't return to his high-rise meetings or luxury flights. Instead, he spent weeks in that same hangar, learning who Emily really was. He learned about her mother's illness, her father's debt, her sleepless nights. He also learned about her strength, the kind no resume could list. The way she stayed behind after every shift, double-checking others' work. The way she fixed planes others signed off on, never asking for credit. Jason realized the world didn't just need more CEOs. It needed people like Emily, fiercely quiet, deeply brave. One afternoon, he handed her a sealed envelope and said softly, "This isn't charity. This is a door you already unlocked on your own." Inside, it wasn't just a check. It was a full scholarship to MIT's engineering program. It came with a position at his company. Not as a mechanic, but as director of aviation safety, with a team under her command. Emily blinked back tears, her voice shaking for the first time. "No one's ever given me something without expecting something back." Jason smiled. "You already paid for this, with every unseen sacrifice." Her knees nearly buckled, but her spirit soared like a jet finally given wings. This was her moment, and she stepped into it without looking back. Months later, the same airport that once overlooked her now bore her name on a plaque. Emily Ray. 4. Service beyond expectation, for seeing what others ignored. People from around the world came to hear her speak at aviation forums, but Emily never bragged. She always began her story with a wrench in hand, and ended it with a quiet truth. Sometimes, the ones who fix us wear no capes. Jason, now her closest friend and business partner, often shared her story. He told boardrooms full of executives that the best investment he ever made wasn't in stocks or aircraft. It was in a girl who once worked alone in the dark and who proved that heart, grit, and purpose can outshine any degree or title. He would pause and say, "If you want to build something unbreakable, start with her." Emily also used her success to return to the hangar where it all began. She funded better equipment, safer procedures, and paid every mechanic fairly. She made sure no girl or boy working in grease-stained uniforms felt invisible again. And on the anniversary of that fateful flight, she held a silent vigil beside the same plane, because heroes never forget where their journey began. She stood there, not for applause, but for memory. For the girl she used to be, tired, soaked, and unheard, and for the countless others still, fighting silently behind the scenes. She whispered, "You matter. Even if no one says it yet, you do." And in that whisper, hope echoed louder than any cheer. The world would always have noise, chaos, and storms, but because of one poor mechanic, girl with a stubborn heart, one life was saved. Then many more. And in every takeoff from that runway, a piece of her story flew too, reminding everyone, Real power comes from staying when others leave. So, the next time you're tempted to ignore the quiet worker in the background, think of Emily, the girl who wasn't supposed to matter, but became the reason a flight didn't end in tragedy, and the reason hope still soars.